This short video, we're going to look at kind of starting a discussion about judges and how they sort of judge the critique. I will forward that there are, well, it's probably not exclusively this way, a good way to start thinking about how to run a critique in front of different types of judges is to group them into three categories. The first group thinks of critiques as a counterplan. The second thinks of critiques as an impact turn. And the third, they judge critiques as a checklist. So let's look at the three different types. The first is critique as a counterplan. So the first thing you have to understand about these types of judges is that they think of the alternative more as a counterplan than anything else. And so the alternative has to generally do something for these types of judges. And it's harder for them to understand why you would do nothing, like with a nihilism alt, or if you were to... rejection might require a little bit more analysis as to how rejection does something, because these judges all think of it like a counterplan. It's got to do something to resolve some of the impacts of the affirmative. So when you are debating in front of them, there's a few things you should do. The first is you want more explanation as to what the alternative does. You want to give some historical examples, perhaps, as to when the alternative has been implemented before and kind of what happened in that historical example, and what it does for the judge and for society, etc., if it were to be kind of scaled up, would all be helpful things depending on what critique that you are necessarily going for. The second, why does the alternative solve the affirmative? That is a question that some of these judges want to be able to hear. Are you deliberately not trying to solve the affirmative? Are you claiming to solve part of the affirmative? Are you claiming to solve all of it? Or are you just claiming to solve the impacts? Whatever the case is, you need to be able to explain for these judges how the alternative functions in relation to the AF. There needs to be a lot of contrast and comparison between what you solve, what the plan solves, and where the stasis point or the differentiation between the two exist, and what kind of implications for that stasis point are there. And it's also good for these judges because that's the spot where you can make a lot of permutation analysis that will sort of insulate you from the affirmative being able to win the perm. The last thing is that you need to be very explicit as to what the alternative needs to do in order to win the debate. So what is it doing? What is it solving? Is it trying to solve the AF? Is it not trying to solve the AF? And more importantly, how does it provide uniqueness for the impacts that your criticism has? This is an important discussion to be able to have, because if they see it like a counterplan, and it's just a uniqueness counterplan, you need to kind of tell them that in order for them to be able to understand that that's exactly what you're going for. So saying something explicitly like, the alternative to the K is blah, 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 it serves like a uniqueness counterplan because, and then explaining that functionality is a good move in order to win in front of judges who think of alternatives more as a counterplan. The second type of judge that I think exists, and I think is kind of becoming more and more prevalent, but definitely not exclusive, obviously, because people think differently, is the critique as an impact turn. And so, if you understand the difference between an impact turn and a parallel impact turn, oftentimes your criticism is going to be operating as a parallel impact turn that has uniqueness for that impact by the alternative. And so you are going to want to be able to explain that and how that happens. What is nice about this vis-a-vis sort of the counterplan judge is that it doesn't require the judge to do something per se, which means that your nihilism alt or your do nothing alt can still provide the uniqueness that is necessary for your impact turns to operate and work, It requires less. The bar for how much your alternative has to do is lowered when you have a critique as an impact term judge in the back. When you're debating in front of them, there's a couple things that become very important. Usually, the link and the impact become very, very important. You need to be able to have clear analysis as to what your theory is, how that theory applies to the affirmative, and having historical examples that judges can really hang their hat on are all significantly important things that need to happen in order for you to pick up the critique as an impact term judge. The other thing that becomes even more important than ever is that you really have to win the impact calculus, roll the ballot, roll the judge sort of arguments in order to frame the debate as to what the judge should consider the biggest priority as far as impacts are concerned, or what is their job inside of that debate. Because what they're really looking at is you've got a set of impacts that the affirmative presented, and then a set of impacts that the negative is presented, and they want to know which one outweighs. And so doing that framing work for them is really important in order for them to be able to in order for them to vote negative. And then the last type of judge that I want you to sort of think about is that there are judges who judge the critique as a checklist. These are usually more policy type debaters who occasionally judge the critique, and there's simply a checklist of K-tricks that critique teams do, and this is things like debate doesn't leave the room, root cause arguments, floating picks, alternative is able to solve the AF, etc., etc. All of those different K-tricks that sort of exist. This judge is lining those tricks up and asking themselves, did the affirmative respond to these things? If the affirmative responded, usually these judges are going to vote affirmative. And so it's important to understand and think about that checklist and try to think of ways you might be able to frame arguments so that if they do answer everything on the checklist, that you are able to make it a step further to really try to win that debate. And most importantly, it really means that every little K trick that you have inside of your negative block has the potential to be able to insulate you, box out the affirmative. So every K trick has to be able to be explained as a reason why you get to box out the affirmative and you need a negative ballot. You're going to look for things like roll the ballot, impact framing, framework. They'll look occasionally for root cause, impact inevitability, uniqueness arguments, try or die framing. Those are all different kind of K tricks that are examples, not an exhaustive list, that they might be looking for. Now, there's a disclaimer to this video. No judge is exclusively one or the other. Every single judge tries to judge the debate that occurred in front of them. What this video is meant to do is to have you sort of start thinking about how do others think about the critique? Because if you start moving beyond how you think about the argument and start thinking about how other people are going to perceive the argument, it helps you learn how to package the critique in order to convince judges to vote for you. So hopefully you can use this video to sort of think about how would you debate in front of these different types of judges if you are reading your favorite critique right now. And as you sort of think about those, it can help you learn to package arguments better and frame out wins for you. My name is Daniel Stout.